Hi there, my name's Eddie, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Wolfsbane Witch. And this is going to be a pretty casual video about finding your own magical correspondences. So the reason why I'm making this video is because sometimes when you find an object, or a plant, or an herb, or something that you want to use for your magical practice, you look something up and you don't find any magical correspondences, any magical history behind it, and sometimes that can make you feel dissuaded from using the object that you want to use in your magical practice. And I want to remind people who might be dissuaded in this way that everything can be used for magic, and that it is completely valid to create your own magical correspondences. So this video is going to share with you a couple of tricks and tips as to how you could do that in your own practice. So I'm going to be breaking this down into 3 main parts, and then after that I am going to show you a real-life example of how I would use these parts in order to create magical correspondences. So that way, if just explaining what to do isn't enough, I can show you how I've actually done it. But before I begin, let's kind of explain what correspondences are, just in case you're not quite familiar with the term or how correspondences are used in magic and why they're used in magic. So a correspondence is something that is similar metaphysically or symbolically to another thing that it is not. So take for instance a seashell. A seashell could be corresponded to the element of water. And the reason why is because there is some sort of either energetic or symbolic connection between the two. And this is used in something called sympathetic magic, or you might have heard like attracts like. And this like attracts like type of magic is used in pretty much every spell ingredient that you would typically see in an herbal shop or in a witchy shop. It all hinges on the idea of sympathetic magic, which is using ingredients that symbolize something in a sort of as above, so below, as above way. So in the physical world, it represents this, so in the metaphysical or energetic world, it represents that as well, in a more literal sense. And that is how correspondences are used in magic. So it's safe to say that anything you use in magic has a sort of corresponding energy or symbolic energy that you can then use for your magic. And this is why creating your own correspondences or using predetermined correspondences is really helpful. Now, you can create your own correspondences for any reason whatsoever. Even if something has historically been used for witchcraft and has its own historical correspondences, if that is something that does not resonate with you, or if you feel that energetically this thing corresponds with something else, it is perfectly valid to create your own correspondences. And this video can also show you how to do that as well. So this will work for things that don't have a lot of history behind them or don't have a lot of direct spiritual correspondences, and things that do, but that you might want to change for your own personal practice. So let's dive right in. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is what it does in nature. So if it is a plant, an animal, or something that exists in nature, we're going to look at the symbology of that and how to break that down and use that for correspondences. Now, just a fair warning, this is a pretty casual video, so if you see me looking down, I do have a notebook with me with some notes on it, because this can kind of have a lot to it and a lot of specific questions, so I'm just gonna read off some of the things that I wrote down as far as things that you could think of or ask yourself in regards to the object that you found in nature, and use that to create your own symbology. So let me just look here. So the first thing that you might want to look at is, where did you find the thing? Did you find it in a forest? Did you find it on the edge of the water? Is it something that grows in the mud? Is it something that grows when it's really dry? What season was it? You can use these to create your own correspondence by corresponding the thing that you found with the environment that it grew in, or anything sort of like that. The next thing that you might want to consider is, what does it behave like in nature? Is it a parasitic entity or plant? So is it like a leech Is it like mistletoe? Is it like Spanish moss? Or is it something like mycelium, which grows on dead things? Is it a form of lichen? Is it a tree? Is it a flower that helps pollinate? These things can also contribute to the symbology of the plant or the object. The next thing you might want to look at is its ecological niche. And that kind of connects to what I just said, but basically everything that exists in nature has its own ecological purpose. And some of it will be, like I said before, parasitic, some of it might be very helpful and be basically hosts of an entire ecosystem or bioregion. In the case of like the redwood forest, the redwoods themselves are hosts of that sort of environment or biosphere. Another thing that you might want to consider when it comes to the nature of an object is what biosphere it is, what region it might be growing in. So if it only grows in cold areas versus if it only grows in hot areas. You could also use this to tie into the ecological niche or the bioregion that it is and where it is in the hierarchy of that. So if it's an animal, is it a keystone species? If it's a plant, is it a sort of keystone plant? Or where does it lie within the ecological biodiversity of the world? Is it something very small that helps other things grow? Is it the thing that grows from those small things? That can kind of help you decide the sort of energy that resides within the object that you're trying to find a correspondence to. Another thing you may wish to consider is if this plant is related to other plants. For instance, sometimes you might find no information on one plant of a species, but another plant of the same species that's closely related to it might be used in historical or witchcraft purposes and have correspondences. So you could use that as a substitute for something that it's related to. Now, of course, when it comes to things like foraging edibles or foraging anything for medicinal properties, just a warning here, even if it is related to something beneficial, if it is not that thing, do not use it internally as that thing. There are plenty of plants that within the same family, one is poisonous and one is completely beneficial. So you cannot use the fact that they are related to each other to determine if one is helpful or harmful to you in the literal, physical, or medicinal sense. In the magical sense, maybe you could, but be careful when it comes to actually using these things for herbal medicine. Use the actual plant that you want to use to represent that actual plant. I know this seems like common sense, but people are going to be doing stupid things, so I just want to put that out there that you cannot substitute it for this reason, but you can substitute it for magical correspondence reasons, and that's what this video is for. And also keep in mind that if you're foraging something, if you don't know what it is, or if you've never seen it before, do not eat it, and do not touch it with your bare hands. Because there are plenty of things that you can touch with your bare hands that are plants, that are completely natural, like poison ivy, or stinging nettle, for instance, that will cause you skin irritation or potential poisoning. So just keep that in mind as well. If you don't know what it is, it's best to not touch it with your bare hands. But with that pretty obvious caveat out of the way, if you do have foraging guides or plant identification guides or even medicinal herb guides, that can also be really helpful in both identifying the plant and also giving you things to work with, either based on its biology and ecological niche, like I talked about earlier, or based on some of the folklore or medicinal properties of it, which I'll get into later when I get into my actual real life example of how I would use something like this. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the nature side of coming up with correspondences. And any of these 3 ways that I'm breaking down coming up with correspondences, you can use in conjunction with each other, which I would recommend, but you can also use them on their own. So you could just look at one of these and use that for your correspondences. But personally, I would use all 3, and like I said, I'll show you that later. So let's move on to the second thing, which is the physical or visual characteristics of the object itself. This is probably the most beginner-friendly way to create correspondences because it doesn't require a whole lot of research or prior knowledge, and a lot of the things that you can kind of discern correspondent-wise out of these physical or visual traits are things that are easily found within witchcraft books and circles. So things like, colors or shapes, things that you can look at within the object itself, you can then use and look up the correspondences of. So I might not know what this particular object is, but I do know what color it is, what texture it is, what material it's made out of, if there's any particular shapes or patterns on it, and I can then translate that into things that I do know, like correspondences based on color, or numerology if there's a pattern that consists of, a certain number of things. Something like that I can then use to create correspondences of something that otherwise I wouldn't have any of. This method can be also used in conjunction with the next method, which is a pretty highly personal method of creating correspondences, and that's using the circumstance that you found the object in, or using your personal intuition or feelings regarding that object to then be able to discern potential correspondences magically of that object. So here are some things that you might want to consider when it comes to that. Again, I'm just looking at my notes here. So you might want to consider something like how you felt while you found the object. Does it remind you of something when you look at it, or does it remind you of a specific time, or person, or feeling, or other object? Like I said before in my seashell analogy, does the seashell remind you of the ocean? And of course the ocean is water. Something like that you could use intuitively. You could also pay attention to the day you found it, the time you found it. Did you find it at night? Did you find it during the day? Did you find it, during a full moon? Did you find it during the solstice? All of these things you can put into consideration when you're looking at the correspondence of the magical object at hand. Another thing that you might want to do is, if you're an animist or if you work with plant spirits, meditate with the object to feel its energy, or you could just ask the object or the spirit of the object what it's there for, what's up with it, what does it do? I think a lot of witches who work with spirits, especially plant or animal or any other form of animism-based spiritual working, they tend to forget that they could just communicate with the object itself and kind of bypass a lot of that other stuff. Of course, it's important, in my opinion, to include that other stuff, but if you're an animist or a spirit worker, it's a little bit more flexible for you. But if worse comes to worse and you still kind of feel stuck, it's okay to just set it and forget it for a little bit. Sometimes the correspondences or the symbology that we have in mind doesn't come to us until we actually need it, and sometimes when we actually need something is a lot further down the line from when we first found it. So it's okay that if you found something and you want to use it, but you're waiting for the right time, it's okay to just kind of set it and forget it for now, and then come back to it when you feel drawn to it again, and see if you might feel any different in regards to its potential correspondences. So now that we've gone over the 3 main methods that you can use to create your own magical correspondences, I'm going to show you a real-life example of how I combine these 3 methods to create my own correspondences. And maybe this will kind of help put into perspective how this actually would functionally work in the real world. So I'm going to show you how I created my magical correspondences to the plant of partridge berries. Now these are really dried out partridge berries. They are not fresh whatsoever. I've had them for a couple years. But when I first found them, I wasn't able to find any real correspondences for them. And so I had to create my own. So I figured this would be a great example of creating correspondences. So let's dive in. So let's start with looking at the nature of partridge berries and how they interact biologically or ecologically within the world. So what are partridge berries, naturally? So partridge berries are low to the ground, edible, flowering, evergreen plants. And they typically grow on a sort of woody, creeping stalk. They are similar to cranberries in some ways, and they also have similar medicinal properties to cranberries, such as being anti-inflammatory in nature, being used to treat UTIs and bowel issues, and they have a long history of being used to help with infertility issues or uterus or menstrual issues. So that's just a baseline look at what partridge berries are naturally and the role that they might serve medicinally for people. Now, not everything is going to have a medicinal role, but these happened too, so I ended up using that within my interpretation of the correspondences. So let's move on to the visual or physical traits of partridge berries and what we might be able to glean from that. So partridge berries are red berries that grow on a green vine, and on that green vine there will be pairs of two green, semi-heart-shaped leaves that grow parallel to each other. Inside of a partridge berry, you will find 8 seeds, and during the springtime, these partridge berries will sometimes flower a pinkish-white flower, and not just having one flower per berry, there's actually 2 flowers that spring per berry, because these berries have 2 separate, what's basically ovaries, that the flowers grow out of. So instead of having 1 flower per berry, it's 2 flowers per partridge berry. And once these flowers fall off, there's left these 2 sort of holes or divots on the berry itself. These berries are typically pretty flavorless, unlike cranberries or berries that might be related to them. So they don't have a lot of taste to them, so that's something you could use. You could also use the texture of them in your mouth, which is a sort of almost like cottony feeling inside. They have a really weird texture when you eat them. So you could use that, so it's sort of softish on the inside, flavorless on the inside. You don't really taste the seeds either, so you could put that into consideration. So here we can notice that there's a sort of pattern of 2s or doubles when it comes to the partridge berry, as well as even numbers too, since you can look at the seeds and count them as 8, so we have these sort of even numbers going on as well. Now from here, you could derive a whole bunch of correspondences. You could create a whole list just based on these 2 things alone without even considering your intuition. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about that and give you the list of things that I came up with just based on the natural and physical traits of the partridge berries alone. So here's the list, and I'm just going to read them off. So we have fertility, longevity, and resilience. I chose this because it's an evergreen, and it has 2 flowers that grow from 1 berry, so it has that sort of fertile, resilient energy to it. The next thing I have is love, compatibility, companionship, dualism. So I chose this because of the pairs of 2, the sort of heart-shaped leaves, the colors of red, pink, and white that you see on the berries and of the flowers that come out of the berries. The next thing I have is divinity. I use this because of the connection to the number 8 and the sort of infinity symbol that number 8 could also tie back to the idea of longevity and resilience, so you can kind of combine a lot of these things together. Another thing I have is subtlety and gentleness. That's because they are kind of low to the ground. They don't have a taste, so they're a very subtle sort of fruit or energy to them. They don't have a very impactful, striking presence, but they do have their own powerful energy within them. They're just kind of subtle and gentle in a way. For some of the health correspondences or bodily correspondences, I have obviously the uterus and uterine health, the blood because of the anti-inflammatory aspects of it, the heart as well, due to that anti-inflammatory. I also use the colors represented, because the berry is red and because the leaves are kind of heart-shaped, so you could put that into your correspondence for health-wise. I don't work with chakras, but I decided to put this in here just to show you how flexible this can be. So because of those health correspondences that you can make, you could also use the colors or the ways that it medicinally would work on your body to translate it to different chakras. So for partridge berries, the chakras that I would choose to associate it with are the sacral, the root, and the heart chakra. I'm not too versed in chakras. Like I said, I don't work with them, so if I'm wrong here, please correct me. I'm just trying to get you guys inspired and show you how to use this, or show you the flexibility and versatility of this sort of method. So let's look at some of the last things I have correspondent-wise. Dual flourishing, agreement, peace, compromise, and growth. I chose that because of the color of the flowers, and the nature of the flowers, the berry and the leaf structure, how they grow together, how they flourish both at the same time, out of the same base berry, out of the same kind of common ground. Another thing that you might want to take into consideration is the name partridge berry. So you could look at the animal of the partridge and see how that might connect to the correspondences that you have already had in mind. And funny enough, some of the things that a partridge, the bird, is associated with is peace, love, community, and also sometimes motherhood. And all of those things go pretty well with a lot of the symbology that we could already discern just from the physical and natural traits of the berry itself. And you can see that like love and peace and, compromise or community could be direct translations to some of the things that I've already listed. And you could tie motherhood to uterus or uterine health or love or fertility. So all of these things still connect to each other pretty well. So if you ever feel stuck, just know that you could kind of branch out and get a little bit creative. And yeah, that's really all I have for you for this video. It's a pretty casual one, like I said before. I just wanted to show you and talk to you about some examples of how to create your own correspondences, so that way if you find something that you really want to use, you don't feel like clueless now. You might have something now to work off of, so that way you can use your creativity to create your own magic. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. If you do something similar, if there's something I missed that's really helpful for you, let me know. I'm all about creating new conversations and just facilitating creativity within witchcraft. So if you watched this far, thank you so much for watching. If you've subscribed already, thank you for subscribing. If you haven't and you want to, definitely go ahead. I post a video every week, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.